Hello and welcome to the Love and Lipstick channel. I'm your host, so you'll be seeing me. This is my first YouTube video, so it should be quite exciting for me. And I'm going to begin with a series called the Introvert series, and it's basically me documenting how introverts exist in a world that values extrovertism a lot more. I once watched a TED talk which was about the power of being an introvert, which was so, I would say, which was so good, because growing up, I remember my school reports, they were littered with the fact that I was hardworking, great, which was great that my teachers knew I was hardworking, but it was always then followed by we could get more, we would value it more if she contributed to lessons, and their explanation of contributing was in fact me being loud in class, me answering all the questions, when in fact a lot of the time I knew the answers, but I just didn't think it was necessary for me to say what the answer was, but rather I'd write it down, and if I was in a small group we'll discuss it and things like that, rather than shout in front of the class or let the teacher always know that I knew the answer. But the teacher always knew that I knew the answer anyway, based on what I wrote about. So you can then grow up and start to feel like the way you are, there is something wrong with it, that you need to be more of this or more of that. For instance, when I went for interviews, and these were like retail interviews and there were group interviews, I was always conscious to not be my natural self, as it were. I was always conscious to make sure I expressed my ideas in the group. Otherwise, it would be misconstrued as that I wasn't confident enough, or that I was less deserving of the job than someone else, perhaps. So I was always really, really conscious of that. And growing up and becoming an adult, when you go into social situations, when you're more reserved, people seem to think that, oh, she's a bit rude, she didn't get involved with the rest of them, maybe she thinks she's better than us or something like that, which is never ever the case. So I think the first part of being an introvert, surviving in an extrovert world, is the first part is, I think, accepting yourself, accepting who you are, accepting that your contribution to life is just different, and it's not the most dominant, it's not the one that people love the most. You're not going to be the one that people laugh at their jokes 24/7, the one that is the life and soul of the party all of the time, the one that people gravitate towards, and that's okay. It's okay to feel, to know that that is not going to be you, and you don't have to adapt who you are, or you don't have to change. I wouldn't say adapt, but you don't have to change who you are completely. You don't have to change. You can exist in that world too. And some of the very great leaders were actually introverts who exhibited their confidence in other ways. So you don't have to be loud and always proud and boastful to let the world know that your conversation, your ideas are valid. So that's one of the things that I have come to realize, actually, as being an introvert, existing in an extrovert world. And sometimes, as when you're an introvert, people seem to think that you're less knowing of the world, or they're surprised when you do certain things. Like as an introvert, sometimes when I get angry about something, you'd see I sort of look around and they're like, oh my goodness, you got angry. And I'm like, yes, I'm a human being. Of course I got angry. But it's only because as an introvert, the actual word introvert in psychological terms means that you can stimulate yourself. So you don't need outside influences to necessarily stimulate you or to fulfill you. Whereas extroverts, people would argue, they need a huge crowd, they need loads of acknowledgement to fuel their personality, whereas introverts don't necessarily need that. Introverts can be okay doing their silent sort of studies and their work rather than to be loud all the time. So that's one of the things that you should know about being an introvert. And one of the things about being an introvert, accepting yourself, is accepting that you may have to do more to gain acceptance of others. For instance, in certain situations, you may have to go out of your comfort zone a lot more, because if you go towards your natural introvert tendencies, people don't get to know who you are. And the world that we live in is quite sad in the way that people don't have much time to actually make their assessment of you. They make it quite instantly. Pardon me. And because they make it quite instantly, people may automatically think you're rude, or you're uncaring, or you don't value what they're talking about, where in all actuality you may be shy, you may be just exhibiting your natural self, whereas an extrovert will be given all their credit for being who they are. They will be accepted more freely just simply because of who they are. So the acceptance journey, I think it's a journey, to be honest with you, from when you're a child to when you're an adult. I think it's a journey of, the more you get to know yourself, the more you know how you should react to certain situations. And I'm just going to do this short series of different things that I have learnt, which has helped me, and I think that it will help someone else out of there. Because especially when you get into the workplace and in school, in education, university, even in other social situations, you go to a party or you're invited out, people make their assessment on the way in which you behave. Because I remember I was at a bar one time and I went to go and get a drink, and this guy said, oh, are you having a good night? And I said, yeah, I'm having an amazing night. And he said, oh, I didn't see you, I don't know, he made this comment that I didn't see something. And I said, oh, that doesn't mean I'm not having a good time. It just meant that at the time I was having a quite little chat with someone, and I may not have been on the dance floor, but it doesn't mean that I'm not having a good time. So he'd already made an assessment of me at that time, which was quite funny. So it can be quite difficult, especially when you feel like you've been judged. You're always being judged as an introvert in some sort of way, and it's hardly ever completely positive. I would say one of the positive attributes is that being an introvert, people seem to think you're cool, calm and collected. And sometimes you internalize certain things like stress and anxiety. So outwardly, someone might not know you suffer from those sorts of things, which in one way it's good, in the way that not everyone should be able to read your emotions, but in so many other ways I feel like it's bad, because it means that because of your personality, you're not used to vocalizing certain things. You can internalize a lot of your, I would say, pain. And when you internalize your pain, that is really detrimental. A lot of your healing comes from talking about your problems and offloading to other people. So a way of accepting yourself is accepting that I have these natural tendencies, but I may need help with this or that. I don't always need to be able to stimulate every part of my life, including when I feel stressed and when I feel anxious. I should be able to allow myself and release myself from that and allow someone else to come into my world. And the funny thing about being an introvert is that it doesn't mean that you're always, I always think that it doesn't mean that you always want to be alone and do solitary things. A lot of the time, being an introvert, you can feel lonely, and you can, and it's not that you enjoy that, but it's that your natural tendency would be to go towards something that you can do to stimulate yourself rather than always being stimulated by others. And being an introvert doesn't mean that you don't have friends or want friends. It just means that the way you interact in the world is in a way that is not always a public display or a public display or something like that. Sometimes it's more in the quiet moments. You might feel to express certain things in a quiet zone or things like that, rather than to be an extrovert that just draws everything from everywhere. Yeah.